In a deeply shocking and emotional turn, Prince William reportedly broke down in tears after Princess Catherine's heart-wrenching announcement about their children. What began as a quiet family update quickly spiraled into a moment that shook the royal household and left the public completely reeling. Insider sources claim Catherine's words carried a weight so personal, so devastating, that even the usually composed prince couldn't hold back his emotions. What could have possibly caused such heartbreak within the palace walls? Let's break it down. Outside Kensington Palace, the air felt heavy, almost wrong that morning. Even the pigeons, normally carefree, seemed tense, as if they could sense that something monumental was about to happen. The chilly breeze seemed sharper, almost slicing through the crowd of reporters who had camped for days, leaning forward, whispers fading into silence as every eye fixed on the creaking palace doors. Then Catherine appeared, alone. No aides, no guards, not even a faint smile. Her steps were careful, deliberate, almost hesitant, yet carried an undeniable fire that seemed to set the very stone beneath her feet alight. Each stride looked like a decision made long ago, one she could never undo. Gone was the polished duchess who had graced magazine covers and royal ceremonies. Here was a woman stripped of pretense, fragile in frame, yet fierce in determination. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from the weight of the truth she was about to reveal. For years, the palace had carefully built her image: perfect mother, loyal wife, graceful royal. But this Catherine was none of those things. She wasn't here to represent the crown. She was here to expose the truth behind it, a truth that had festered silently in the shadows of history. The grey stone walls of Kensington loomed larger than ever, silent and imposing. The nursery windows, once glowing with laughter, now stared coldly, witnesses to a truth that could no longer be hidden. Inside those rooms, the world believed in royal fairy tales. Tiny thrones, playful smiles, picture-perfect family moments for the cameras. But Catherine's trembling voice would soon shatter that illusion, revealing a reality far darker than anyone imagined. Whispers rippled among the aides nearby. Should they stop her? Could they? By the time one moved, it was already too late. She had adjusted the microphone. No royal backdrop, no crest, just the cold stone walls, the anxious crowd, and the thick electric air of anticipation that seemed to pulse with every heartbeat. When she finally raised her eyes, they glistened not with weakness, but with restrained fire. The cameras didn't capture her smile. They caught the raw ache of motherhood, stretched thick in every second before she spoke. Her voice quivered at first, cracking under the weight of truth, then steadied, soft, yet unyielding. "My silence," she said quietly, "was killing me more than any scandal ever could." Gasps rippled through the press line. This wasn't a rehearsed royal statement, it was a confession. She spoke of her children, not as heirs to a throne, but as little souls suffocating under expectations they never asked for. George's quiet tears after public appearances, Charlotte questioning why fun had to be perfect, Louis confused seeing his mother smile when she wanted to cry. Every word chipped away at the fragile facade of royal happiness. She described moments unseen by cameras, whispers of bedtime fears, and stolen laughter forced into secrecy. "They are children," she whispered, voice shaking. "Yet every day they live in the shadow of what they're meant to become." Those words hit harder than any political scandal ever could. Catherine wasn't attacking the crown. She was pleading for her children's right to be human. Every hug, every laugh, every stumble, dissected by the press, turned into stories that stripped her family of privacy and peace. The monarchy's obsession with image, Catherine said, had turned her children's innocence into public property. "No crown, no facade," she declared, her voice suddenly steady and fierce, "that a child's peace of mind is worth more than any royal title or ceremonial duty." The world fell silent. Even the reporters lowered their cameras, caught between awe and disbelief. In that moment, Catherine wasn't a royal. She was every mother who had ever fought to protect her child, every woman who had been told to stay silent and smile while danger or injustice raged beneath the surface. The tremor in her words rippled through the monarchy itself, shaking centuries of tradition built on control, secrecy, and rigid expectation. But the world had only heard the beginning, because what came next wasn't just a continuation, it was a reckoning. The palace had barely recovered from her confession when she prepared to deliver the second speech that would shock everyone present. What truth could be powerful enough to silence an entire kingdom? Keep watching to uncover the hidden war inside the royal nursery, behind the shimmering walls of Kensington and Windsor, where photographers captured smiles and picture-perfect waves, but reality pulsed far beneath. The royal nursery, once painted as a cradle of laughter and love, had become something far colder. Every hour of the young royals' lives was carefully planned and rehearsed, their innocence trimmed and sculpted to fit the expectations of a crown that demanded perfection. From morning lessons to evening walks, nothing was left to chance. Even their laughter seemed measured, as if joy itself required permission. George, the eldest, carried the weight of destiny far too early. His mother spoke with a trembling voice about how her curious little boy had grown quiet, distant, almost afraid to breathe wrong. Once filled with wonder, he now asked questions no child should ever have to ask. "What happens if I don't want to be king?" And whispered, "What if I'm not good enough?" Palace aides brushed it aside, reminding him that fate was not a choice. But Catherine knew better. Her son's spirit was bending under pressure, his smile replaced by silence, his young shoulders bearing a burden far too heavy for his age. Charlotte, his sister, burned with the opposite fire. She rebelled, questioned, refused to be molded into the quiet, polished princess the world expected. Catherine admired that defiance. It was a spark of life the palace could not extinguish, but it came at a cost. Each display of independence brought private reprimands. Every unloyal question was answered with warnings about duty and loyalty. Her boldness wasn't strength to them, it was a flaw to be corrected. And then there was little Louis, too young to understand yet already trapped by the same invisible chains. Catherine revealed how he had begun to freeze whenever cameras appeared, uncertain why strangers screamed his name or studied his every move. The world saw admiration. He saw threat. The flashing lights weren't applause, they were alarms. Even his innocence wasn't safe from the public's hunger. As Catherine spoke of her children, the pain in her voice grew heavier. She had once told herself that the pressure would fade, that this was simply life as a royal. But as the laughter in their home disappeared and silence grew louder, she realized it wasn't stress. It was conditioning. Her children were being shaped not to lead, but to obey, to perform. What she uncovered behind those palace walls went far beyond strict parenting. It was a system designed to strip away emotion, to train heirs into living symbols aligned with royal decorum. "They're not being raised," she said softly. "They're being programmed." Then came her most disturbing revelation: emotional control, disguised as discipline. Her children were taught never to cry, never to tremble, never to feel. Vulnerability was treated like weakness. They were praised for composure, punished for emotion. "They're being trained," she whispered, "not to feel, but to perform." That line broke through the air like thunder. Childhood wasn't lived, it was rehearsed. Catherine's fury deepened as she described how palace advisors had even dictated her own motherhood. She was told to maintain distance, to let her children learn independence through emotional separation, the same cold method that had been imposed on royal generations before, leaving behind quiet heartbreak hidden beneath golden crowns. Every careful gesture, every laugh monitored, every tear observed, had been a lesson in control rather than care. Her voice shook as she said, "No mother should ever be told that love can be harmful." Even William, she confessed, had been caught in that same web, pressured by tradition. He too had been urged to prioritize duty over tenderness. "He loves them," she said, "but he's been taught to love them from afar." The room fell utterly silent, the weight of centuries pressing down. It was a line that carried echoes of another era, another mother, another tragedy. Then came the words that froze everyone in place. "This cycle has already taken too many before." She didn't say Diana's name, but she didn't have to. The moment she spoke, the ghost of the people's princess stirred again, haunting the audience with her quiet, tragic power. Everyone could feel history repeating itself in that charged silence. Catherine's voice, trembling with love and defiance, carried the same fire. Diana had once fought to protect her children from the same cold system that consumed her, and now Catherine's courage was seen as the continuation of that unfinished battle, a battle for compassion within an institution built on restraint. While the world celebrated her bravery, the palace itself fell into uneasy silence. Behind golden walls, one man was breaking in ways no one could see. Catherine's words had awakened something long buried in William's heart, a storm he had held at bay for decades, and that brings us to William's emotional response. A moment so raw, so haunting, it left everyone wondering what happens when the future king finally feels what the crown taught him to forget. History seemed to fold in on itself that day. The echo of Catherine's trembling voice lingered in the corridors of Kensington, refusing to fade. Her confession had cracked open the royal facade, and for the first time, he wasn't sure which side of that fracture he stood on. Pride and pain collided within him. Pride for her courage and devastation at the truth. It forced him to confront the man he had been raised to be. The crown's heir, now torn between two sacred vows. One sworn to the monarchy that shaped him, another to the family that gave him reason to live. In his private chamber, time seemed to slow. Outside, the palace roared with chaos. Phones ringing, advisors rushing, security whispering into radios. But William sat motionless before a glowing television screen. Catherine's speech replayed again and again, every syllable cut deeper. The last words, her face filled with both strength and sorrow, reminded him so painfully of his mother that he could barely breathe. The same fire that once lived in Diana's eyes now burned in Catherine's, and it terrified him because he knew the cost of defying the crown. The corridors buzzed with panic as senior advisors and communications officers flooded the room, papers in hand. Voices rose in urgent tones, demanding a counter-statement, a carefully worded message to restore public confidence and protect the institution. But beneath their calm language hid the same old command: silence her, discredit her, make the problem disappear. William couldn't speak. Every proposed phrase felt like a betrayal waiting to happen. The court wanted damage control. He wanted truth, but truth came with a cost. And the moment he opened his mouth, he would have to choose: the crown, or the woman who had just risked everything for their children. Every passing second stretched like a lifetime, the weight of legacy pressing down harder than ever. One advisor snapped impatiently, calling his hesitation a betrayal through silence. Another warned that if he didn't act soon, the monarchy's image would crumble. Yet their words barely reached him, because behind all the noise, he heard another voice, the voice of his mother, never sacrificed, never silenced, whispering through the years. "Truth over duty," Diana had once said. "It will cost you everything." That memory shattered something inside William. For years he had carried the image of her tear-streaked face, the way she had begged to protect him and Harry from the same ruthless system that pretended to care. He remembered the cold, practiced smiles of palace officials, the endless isolation she endured when she refused to play the palace game, the loneliness of a mother silenced by tradition and expectation. Now, Catherine stood in that same storm, alone, brave, trembling, and he was expected to silence her just as they had silenced his mother. His composure finally cracked. Sitting alone after the advisors had gone, William buried his face in his hands as tears came, first quietly, then uncontrollably. It wasn't only Catherine's pain that shattered him. It was everything he had spent years trying to bury. The loss of his mother, the emptiness of duty, the cruel cycle that turned love into liability inside those golden walls. He thought of his children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, 3 innocent souls already living under the same suffocating expectations that had once destroyed their grandmother. The thought made his heart ache. "Whatever it takes," he whispered to the empty room, his voice trembling with a vow. "No one else will ever hear it, but I'll protect them." That wasn't the promise of a future king. It was the desperate oath of a father standing on the edge of collapse. He knew this decision could cost him everything he'd been raised to preserve, but something inside him had shifted forever. The boy who had watched his mother's light fade had finally found the courage to fight for his own family's peace. But William's vow would soon ignite a new battle, not between husband and wife, but between the future king and the reigning one. Stay with us. King Charles's immediate order: silence, the princess. When Catherine's words echoed through Buckingham Palace, the air seemed to freeze. Every corridor, every chandelier-lit hall felt heavier than ever. To King Charles, her heartfelt confession wasn't the plea of a mother. It was an open challenge to the monarchy itself. For decades, he had endured whispers, betrayal, and scandal, but nothing had ever struck this deep. This wasn't an external attack. It came from within the family, from someone the world adored. Camilla's reaction was even fiercer. She didn't see Catherine's speech as courage, but as a calculated betrayal. Catherine had done the unthinkable. She had weaponized emotion to win the public's heart and turn it against the very institution that had given her power. "She's weaponizing motherhood!" Camilla reportedly hissed, her voice trembling with anger. What burned her most wasn't Catherine's words. It was the world's reaction. Overnight, sympathy had shifted. Headlines weren't about the monarchy, they were about the mother who dared to speak behind closed doors. Chaos brewed. Charles called for an emergency meeting. Senior advisors gathered in the Crimson Chamber, pale under the chandelier's cold light. The king's tone was sharp, his patience gone. "How did this happen?" he demanded, not in confusion, but in disbelief. No one answered. The room buzzed with fear as forced calm discussions turned to damage control, restricting Catherine's appearances, reshaping public narratives, silencing the media storm. But Charles didn't want an explanation. He wanted obedience. She will not speak again. The command sliced through the air, final and absolute. And just like that, the monarchy's response began to take shape, not through reason or dialogue, but through suppression. Camilla's resentment only deepened. She had spent years clawing her way into acceptance, enduring public hatred and media humiliation, yet with a single emotional speech, Catherine had undone all of that. To the people, Camilla was the symbol of control. Catherine, the symbol of compassion. One was royalty, respected but distant. The other, relatable, flawed, brave and human. And that terrified Camilla more than any scandal ever could. Soon, leaks began to emerge from the palace itself. Unnamed sources whispered to tabloids that Catherine was struggling emotionally and mentally unstable. Claims hauntingly familiar to those who remembered Diana's story. The same tactics that had once broken William's mother were dusted off and used again, this time against his wife. But the palace didn't anticipate one thing. The world had changed. The people no longer believed everything they read. Instead, the attacks only made Catherine more beloved. Across continents, she was no longer seen as a princess bound by protocol. She was a mother standing up for her children, and her pain had become universal, echoing in the hearts of parents who understood what it meant to fight for a child's freedom. Social media exploded with messages of support, posts, and quotes from her speech, and suddenly the royal mask of perfection was cracking. Behind it, people saw something raw, something real. Then came the confrontation that shattered whatever calm remained. William, torn between duty and love, stormed into his father's study. The usually composed prince was visibly shaken. "She did it because she had to," he pleaded. "She's protecting our children, not defying you." But Charles, still bound to his crown more than his heart, snapped back. "She's endangering everything we've built." The exchange spiraled, emotions colliding like thunder. When Camilla stepped in, hoping to cool the fire, William turned sharply. His words cut deeper than any rebellion before. "If you silence her, you lose me too." It wasn't anger, it was heartbreak. In that moment, the air around the throne chose humanity over hierarchy. That night, Buckingham Palace was silent again, but it was the silence before a storm. The cracks in the monarchy's walls had widened beyond repair, and the outside world was no longer waiting quietly. From London to Los Angeles, people were rising, not in hatred, but in solidarity. Catherine's words had become more than a confession, they were a spark. And as that spark spread across the globe, one question burned brighter than ever. Was this the beginning of the monarchy's reckoning or the rebirth of its most dangerous truth? Let's explore the Catherine effect. The world had never witnessed anything like it before. Within mere hours of Catherine's trembling confession, her words had escaped the palace gates and swept across continents like wildfire. It wasn't just another royal announcement, it was an awakening. That night, people didn't see a duchess wrapped in diamonds or a picture-perfect royal image. They saw a mother stripped of pretense, standing before the world with a shaking voice. In her unguarded heart, her truth, raw, painful, and utterly human, rippled through television screens and timelines, bringing even the strongest to tears across the globe. Her revelation ignited a movement. Crowds gathered outside Kensington Palace, not with cameras or curiosity, but with candles and silence. The air felt heavy, sacred even. Across New York, Paris, and Sydney, people filled city squares holding signs that read, "Let them be children and no crown without compassion." It was no longer about monarchy. It was about motherhood, about love, about the fight to protect innocence in a world built on appearances. Catherine's courage had become universal. She wasn't just speaking for herself or her children anymore. She was speaking for every parent who had ever felt powerless under expectation. The press couldn't contain the storm. What began as a royal scandal soon became what headlines called the Catherine effect. Morning news anchors replayed her speech with reverence. Commentators who once criticized her for being too silent now praised her bravery. Even long-time royal reporters admitted they had never seen anything so unfiltered, so fearless. Tabloids that once chased her every move suddenly printed editorials calling her the heart that shook the crown. The public no longer viewed her as the Duchess of Cambridge. They saw a woman reclaiming her voice in a palace built to silence it. But behind palace walls, the atmosphere was far from admiring. The silence from the royal family spoke louder than any statement. Every hour without response made the crown appear colder, more disconnected, almost fragile. Inside, King Charles's advisors scrambled, courtiers whispered, and William was caught in the middle of a storm that no protocol could contain. His wife had done what no one before her dared. She had broken the royal facade, exposing the human cost beneath it. Then came the moment that silenced the world once again. The palace gates opened, and Catherine returned, no longer trembling or afraid. She stood beneath the grey London sky, calm and resolute. The press hushed as she stepped to the microphone. This time she didn't come to explain herself. She came to make history. "My children deserve to laugh without fear," she began softly, "to grow without duty, to live without being watched." And with that, she declared that her children would no longer take part in royal public duties. Their childhood, she said, is not a performance. It is theirs. Gasps filled the air. Generations of royal tradition shattered in a heartbeat. The monarchy's future, the heirs themselves, had just been pulled out of the spotlight. Catherine had not just spoken her truth. She had rewritten the rules. So was it a mother's cry for help, or a quiet rebellion against the system controlling her family? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with everyone who believes that love and humanity should always come before protocol.